Confusion is not a flaw in the sports card industry, it is exactly the product. Most people don't want to hear that because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Hey there, my name is Ryan and welcome to the channel. On this channel, we don't chase hype, we don't sell hope, and we don't pretend nostalgia is an investment strategy. We break down how the sports card market actually works, not the stories you're sold, not the screenshots you're shown, and not the wins that get reposted 1,000 times while the losses disappear. So in this video, I'm going to show you why confusion isn't accidental in this hobby, why it is engineered, why it is profitable, and why the industry makes more money the longer you stay unsure about what you're really buying. If you've ever felt overwhelmed, if you've ever wondered why smart people keep losing money, or if you've ever thought maybe I just haven't figured it out yet, this video is for you. So let's get into it. Confusion is not a flaw in the sports card industry. It is not an accident, a temporary phase, or a side effect of growth. Confusion is the product itself. More precisely, confusion is the most profitable product the industry has ever created, refined, and successfully sold at scale. So to understand why, you have to stop looking at sports cards the way participants are encouraged to look at them, through nostalgia, personal identity, or surface level price charts, and instead view the ecosystem as a commercial machine. Every profitable system has a core incentive. In sports cards, that incentive is not long-term value creation for buyers. It is short-term revenue extraction through perpetual participation. Confusion keeps people participating far longer than clarity ever would. And a clear market educates participants to make fewer and better decisions, while a confused market encourages more frequent, emotionally driven ones. The sports card industry thrives on the latter. At its core, confusion allows multiple contradictory beliefs to coexist without resolution. Sports cards are simultaneously framed as childhood keepsakes, modern luxury items, speculative investment, cultural artifacts, and alternative assets. Each of these identities appeals to a different psychological need, and the industry benefits from never forcing participants to choose between them. When definitions remain blurry, expectations become malleable. When expectations are malleable, disappointment is delayed, and delayed disappointment is extremely profitable. Now, if sports cards were honestly and consistently framed as entertainment products with speculative resale potential and nothing more, the industry would shrink overnight. Many participants would still collect, but far fewer would overspend. Fewer would rip sealed product chasing unrealistic returns. Fewer would justify irrational purchases as investments. Fewer would enter the market believing they had discovered a shortcut to wealth that previous generations somehow missed. Confusion keeps those beliefs alive just long enough to convert optimism into revenue. The industry does not need participants to win financially. It only needs them to believe that winning is possible, imminent, and just one purchase away. So this belief is sustained by ambiguity. When people do not clearly understand what kind of market they are in, they would borrow frameworks from other domains, like a stock market mindset gets applied to a collectibles market. A collectibles mindset gets applied to a mass manufactured entertainment product. A long-term investment mindset gets applied to a short-term hype cycles. So none of these frameworks fully fit, but each offers just enough plausibility to keep people engaged. Confusion also allows losses to be rationalized instead of confronted. A failed flip becomes long-term hold. A bad purchase becomes for the personal collection. And a declining card becomes undervalued. The language shifts. the mental accounting adjusts and the participant stays in the game. So this is not accidental. It is structural. One of the most powerful forms of confusion in the sports card industry is the deliberate blending of emotional value and financial value. Cards are marketed as objects of passion, memory, and identity while simultaneously being discussed in terms of price appreciation, population reports, and record breaking sales. So, this creates a psychological double bind. When a purchase succeeds financially, it is celebrated as proof of savvy. When it fails, it is reframed as something you love anyway. Either way, the act of purchasing is validated. No other consumer industry benefits as much from this dual justification. A failed stock investment is simply a loss. A bad business decision is simply a mistake. But a losing sports card purchase can be emotionally insulated by attachment, nostalgia, or fandom. So the pain is softened. The lesson is postponed. The behavior continues. Confusion also obscures responsibility. When outcomes are unclear, participants struggle to identify what went wrong. What is bad timing, market manipulation, grading inconsistency, player injury, broader economic conditions, overprinting, social media hype? Because there are so many variables and because the industry never clarifies which ones matter most, individual accountability becomes diffuse. Losses feel external rather than structural. This is incredibly important. People leave markets when they understand why they lost and realize the odds are stacked against them. People stay when they believe they simply haven't figured it out yet. The sports card industry depends on that belief. So consider how products are sold. Sealed boxes are marketed with stories, not probabilities. Odds are buried in fine print, while visuals highlight gold parallels, autographs, and low serial number cards. So the experience is framed as discovery rather than gambling. Even the language avoids clarity. Packs are ripped, boxes are broken, hits are pulled. So these verbs emphasize action and excitement, not expectation and cost. What is rarely emphasized is the mathematical reality. Most sealed products is a negative expected value. And this is not a controversial statement, it is a requirement for the business model to function. Manufacturers, distributors, breakers, platforms, and content creators all need margin. Now, that margin comes from aggregate loss at the participant level. Yet, many buyers enter breaks or open boxes believing they are engaging in some hybrid of entertainment and investment without ever being forced to confront which one dominates the equation. Confusion thrives when costs are fragmented. Buying a $1,200 box feels different than losing $1,200. Buying spots on breaks, packs over time, or singles in small increments masks total exposure. Participants rarely calculate their net position across months or years. They remember the hits, they forget the bleed. This is not because they are unintelligent, it is because the system is designed to make tracking reality emotionally inconvenient. So, another layer of confusion comes from selective visibility. Social media amplifies wins and suppresses losses. Big pools are photographed, graded, celebrated, and reposted. Failed boxes, they disappear quietly. The result is a distorted perception of outcomes. New entrants see a feed filled with success stories and assume they are normal. They are not seeing the silent majority who paid for those success collectively. This distortion creates survivorship bias on a massive scale. So the industry does not need to fabricate success, it simply needs to spotlight it disproportionately. Confusion fills in the gaps. Price charts add another deceptive layer. Seeing a card that once sold for $10,000 and now sells for $3,000 create the illusion of opportunity. What is often missing is context, timing, liquidity, volume, condition sensitivity, and broader market sentiment. Decline is interpreted as undervaluation instead of reversion. Recovery is assumed instead of questioned. Without a clear framework for how and why prices move, participants mistake volatility for potential. The language of investing further muddies the waters. Terms like buy the dip, long term hold, blue chip, and generational talent are borrowed from traditional finance and applied loosely to sports cards. This creates a false sense of rigor. The words sound analytical, but they are rarely grounded in measurable fundamentals. They provide comfort without clarity. So, confusion also protects the industry from ethical scrutiny. If sports cards are merely a hobby, losses are the cost of fun. If they are an investment, risk is assumed. By never committing to one identity, the industry avoids accountability for either. Participants are subtly encouraged to accept whichever framing best explains their current outcome. When someone wins, the system celebrates intelligence. When someone loses, the system emphasizes passion. This asymmetry keeps dissatisfaction from turning into exit. The role of grading further complicates perception. Grading introduces an external authority that appears objective, scientific, and final. Slabs feel like assets, numbers feel indefinitive. Yet grading outcomes are probabilistic, subjective, and context dependent. Small differences in condition can produce massive price swings, but the reasons for those differences are often opaque. Participants are taught to chase grades without fully understanding the risk involved. Confusion here is especially profitable because it encourages repeated submissions. A near miss feels like unfinished business. A lower than expected grade feels like bad luck rather than a predictable outcome. So the promise of a higher grade next time keeps people engaged in an expensive loop. Even the concept of scarcity is intentionally muddled. Serial numbers, parallels, and short prints suggest rarity, but rarity without demand is meaningless. The industry floods the market with variations while maintaining the illusion that each one matters. Participants are left to navigate a maze of options without a reliable map. Most do not realize that demand fragments faster than supply, eroding value across the board. Confusion also prevents collective learning. In transparent markets, participants share data, refine models, and converge toward more accurate pricing. In the sports card market, information is fragmented, very fragmented. It's anecdotal and emotionally charged. Advice is often tied to inventory. Content is often tied to sponsorship. Education is often tied to selling something. So this creates a feedback loop where myths persist longer than facts. The industry does not need to suppress truth. It simply needs to drown it in noise. Now, perhaps the most dangerous form of confusion is the idea that knowledge alone guarantees success. Many participants believe that if they just learn more about players, sets, parallels, grading, they will eventually crack the code. This belief fuels endless consumption of content and product. What is rarely acknowledged is that structural disadvantages cannot be outlearned. Knowing more does not change expected value. It only changes how losses are rationalized. Confusion convinces people that the problem is personal rather than systemic. That belief keeps them spending. So, it is important to be clear. This does not make the industry evil. It makes it commercial. Confusion exists because it works. It aligns incentives. Manufacturers sell more products, platforms generate more fees, content creators attract more engagement, participants stay hopeful longer. But understanding this changes everything. When you recognize that confusion is profitable, you stop treating ambiguity as something to be resolved by participation. You stop assuming clarity will arrive organically. You begin to demand definitions instead of narratives. So, my goal is not to strip joy from collecting. My goal is to strip illusion from decision making. Enjoyment does not require confusion. Participation does not require self deception. You can love sports cards and still understand the system you are engaging with. But that understanding begins with a hard truth. The industry makes more money when you are unsure what you are doing, unsure what kind of market you are in, and unsure how success should be measured. Clarity is very expensive, confusion is scalable. And until participants learn to recognize that difference, confusion will remain the most valuable card the industry ever produced. To understand how confusion is operationalized in the sports card world, it helps to stop speaking in abstractions and look directly at the mechanisms that's created, not in theory, not in marketing language, but in lived experience. So when people say the hobby feels overwhelming or that it's hard to tell what's worth it, they're usually reacting to a small number of systems that are doing an enormous amount of psychological work behind the scenes. Among those systems, three stands out as especially effective at keeping participants slightly off balance. Those are breaks, parallels, and grading. They are not confusing by accident. They are confusing because confusion keeps the wheel turning. So let's start with breaks because they are the most naked example of how clarity is intentionally softened. On the surface, a break is sold as a democratizing tool. Boxes are expensive, often prohibitively so, and breaks are presented as a solution. Instead of one person paying $1,000, 30 people can each pay a smaller amount. So the language emphasizes access, fairness, and excitement. You are told you are buying into a chance, not a loss. You are paying for an experience, not an outcome. So that framing matters more than most people realize. What a break actually does is separate cost from consequence. In a traditional box opening, the pain of loss is direct and unmistakable. You spend a large amount of money, you open the box, and you are confronted immediately with what you received. While in a break, the cost is fragmented and the disappointment is diluted. Paying $30 feels trivial compared to paying $1,000. Receiving nothing feels unfortunate rather than catastrophic. The emotional sting that would normally teach restraint is reduced to just a shrug. This is where confusion becomes profitable. Participants are no longer evaluating value in terms of return. They are evaluating it in terms of entertainment. Losing money is reframed as not hitting. Missing out is reframed as bad luck. The exception quietly shifts from what am I likely to get to what if I get lucky? That shift is the entire game itself. Now, from a structural standpoint, breaks dramatically increase the total number of people funding the sale of high-priced sealed product. Boxes that would be difficult to move to individual buyers are easily sold when the cost is sliced thin enough. The breaker assumes no real risks. The platform takes a cut. The manufacturer's box is sold at full price. The only party exposed to downside is the participant. And even then, the exposure is disguised as entertainment. Now, the confusion lies in the fact that breaks feel participatory rather than extractive. You are watching, you are chatting, you are hoping, you are reacting in real time. So the experience feels active, but economically, the outcome is closer to a raffle where most tickets yield nothing. The fact that this is normalized rather than questioned tells you how effective the framing has been. Parallels and refractors operate on a different axis, but the underlying logic is very much the same. They exploit the human tendency to equate visual distinction with importance. Now, when a card is presented with a different color, a different shine, or a serial number stamped on it, The brain is primed to interpret that difference as meaning. Rarity feels intuitive, scarcity feels valuable. The problem is not that scarcity exists, but that it has been industrialized. In earlier eras of collecting, scarcity was often a byproduct of circumstance. Limited production runs, regional distribution, fragile materials, or time itself reduced supply. In the modern era, scarcity is a design of choice. The same image, the same card, the same player is printed dozens of times with minor cosmetic variations. Each variation is marketed as distinct. Each is given its own name, its own numbering, its own justification for existence. Now, this creates a peculiar illusion. On paper, each parallel is rare. In reality, the market is saturated with versions of the same thing. Demand does not scale linearly with supply variation. Just because 50 different people can feel like they hit does not mean there are 50 buyers waiting at meaningful prices. What has been created is not scarcity but fragmentation. The confusion here is subtle but powerful. Participants are trained to chase rarity without being taught to interrogate demand. They learn to value the idea of out of 99 without asking how many other out of something versions exist. They are shown population counts without being shown absorption capacity. They are told a card is special without being told how many near identical substitutes compete for attention. Now, from the industry's perspective, parallels are a masterstroke. They allow manufacturers to sell the same content repeatedly while preserving the emotional payoff of discovery. Instead of one winner, there are many. Instead of one chase, there are dozens. Each new color, each new pattern, or serial range resets the hunt. The market never settles because there is always another version just rare enough to justify buying again. Now, grading completes the loop by introducing an external authority that promises resolution while quietly extending uncertainty. The pitch is precision. A trained expert examines your card, applies standardized criteria, and assigns a definitive score. Now, that score, you are told, converts ambiguity into fact. It separates the exceptional from the ordinary. It unlocks value. The reality is more complicated. Grading is not measurement in the way weight or length is measured. It is evaluation. It involves judgment calls about centering, surface, edges, and corners. Judgment calls made by humans working under time pressure. Consistency is pursued, but it is not guaranteed. Variance is not a bug. It is an unavoidable feature. The confusion arises because the output is presented as objective while the process remains opaque. A card receives a number, and that number carries enormous financial implications, yet the rationale behind it is rarely transparent. Two cards that look identical to the naked eye can receive different grades. The same card can receive different grades on different submissions. Participants are left with a result but no clear explanation. So, this uncertainty does not discourage participation, it fuels it. A grade that falls just short of perception feels like unfinished business. The gap between a 9 and a 10 becomes psychological itch. Maybe it was harsh. Maybe the grader missed something. Maybe next time will be different. The card goes back into the mail, another fee is paid, the wheel turns again and again and again. From the industry's standpoint, grading is brilliant because it adds a second layer of chance to an already uncertain system. First, you hope to acquire a desirable card. Then, you hope that card is deemed exceptional by a third party. Each step feels like progress. Each step costs money. Each step postpones finality. Now, taken together, breaks, parallels, and grading form a closed circuit. Breaks normalize losing as entertainment, parallels normalize abundance as rarity, Grading normalizes opinion as fact. At every stage, the participant is positioned just close enough to success to keep trying. Failure is never definitive. Clarity is never complete. This is the big takeaway that often gets missed. The industry does not rely on deception in the crude sense, it relies on proximity. You are always adjacent to a win, never far enough away to disengage. If you miss in a break, there is another break. If you pull the wrong color, there is another parallel. If you get the wrong grade, there is another submission. So the system is designed so that the next step always feels rational. That is why confusion is so valuable. A fully understood system would force hard choices. People would know when the odds are bad. They would know when to stop. They would know when enjoyment ends and exposure begins. Confusion blurs those lines. It keeps participation elastic. None of this means that breaks, parallels, or grading are inherently evil or that they may just be avoided entirely. What it means is that they must be understood for what they are before they are used. They are tools of engagement, not guarantees of value. They exist to increase velocity, not certainty. Once you see that, your relationship with the hobby changes. You stop asking, what is this? What if this is the one? And start asking, what is this actually designed to do? So that shift does not kill enjoyment. It restores agency. It allows you to decide when you are paying for fun, when you are speculating, and when you are simply feeding confusion. And that distinction between participation and understanding is where real control begins. So, to move from understanding confusion to defending yourself against it, you have to make a deliberate shift on how to evaluate cards. This is where most people fail, not because they lack intelligence, but because they are still listening to the story instead of interrogating the structure. The industry tells stories exceptionally well. Stories about rarity, upside, momentum, legacy, and timing. What it rarely tells you is how fragile most of those stories are when exposed to basic scrutiny. A smart purchase does not announce itself with excitement. A confusing trap almost always does. The simplest way to tell the difference is to strip away everything that sounds impressive and ask what actually makes the card distinct in a way that survives time, attention shifts, and market fatigue. This starts with rarity because rarity is the most abused concept in the entire hobby. A card is not meaningfully rare just because it has a color, a foil treatment, or a serial number stamped on it. Those features feel important because they are visually obvious and easy to market. But when a card exists in 20 or 30 nearly identical versions, each differentiated by nothing more than a shade or pattern, the scarcity is artificial. It has been manufactured to create more moments of perceived victory, not to preserve long-term demand. Now, true rarity is not about how few copies exist in isolation. It is about how many people agree that a specific version is the one that matters. That consensus is what gives a card staying power. A player's true rookie card from a flagship or historically respected set carries weight because the market has collectively decided it does. The same is true for authentic, on-card autographs from players whose career justify long-term interest. These cards remain relevant even as new products flood the market because they anchor demand instead of fragmenting it. When the only thing making a card special is a shiny border or a slightly lower serial number than any other version, you are not buying rarity, you are buying decoration. Decoration does not protect value when attention moves on. So, grading introduces another layer where the traps are easy to fall into if you don't slow down and look at relative pricing. One of the most common mistakes, even among experienced collectors, is paying enormous premiums for the highest possible grade without considering what that premium actually represents. When a perfect grade sells for 10 times the price of the same card one grade lower, You are no longer buying the card, you are buying the label. So this matters because the difference between those grades often has little to do with how the card looks to most people. A PSA 9 and a PSA 10 are, in many cases, visually indistinguishable outside of magnification and professional scrutiny. Yet, the market treats them as entirely different assets. That price gap is not based on utility, enjoyment, or even rarity alone. It is based on collective belief and competitive psychology. So, paying that premium means you are exposed to a very specific risk that the market's obsession with perfection softens. If that happens, the value collapses not because the card changed, but because the narrative did. A smarter approach is to often to buy just below the emotional peak. High grade but not perfect cards allow you to own the same piece of history without absorbing the most fragile part of the pricing structure. You let someone else pay for the illusion of invisibility. Invincibility, I mean. Hype is the next filter where confusion does the most damage. Modern card markets are driven heavily by narrative momentum. A rookie has a breakout game. A young player trends on social media. Prices spike almost instantly. So this feels like opportunity, but it is usually the opposite. When attention is at its highest, prices reflect maximum optimism. You are not buying value, you are buying hope at retail. So the industry depends on this cycle. There is always a next name, a next surge, a next wave of belief. Most of those stories do not end well. Careers stall, injuries happen, roles change. The cards that were once framed as inevitable successes quietly bleed value as attention moves elsewhere. 3 years later, many of those players are remembered only as lessons. Contrast that with retired legends. Their careers are complete, their narratives are finished, there is no future performance risk. Demand is not driven by speculation about what might happen, but by agreement about what already did. Prices may still fluctuate, but the foundation is history rather than hype. That stability is not exciting, which is precisely why it is safer. Liquidity is the final test that exposes many traps. Rarity without liquidity is a liability. A card can be technically scarce and still be extremely difficult to sell. One-of-one cards of marginal players feel special because there is literally only one. But that uniqueness cuts both ways. If there are no buyers when you want to exit, the card's theoretical value becomes irrelevant. Smart purchases tend to sit where activity already exists. Cards with frequent recent sales provide proof of life. They demonstrate that demand is not hypothetical. Being able to see multiple transactions at consistent prices is more valuable than owning something no one knows how to price. Liquidity is not glamorous, but it is what turns cardboard into money instead of regret. When you step back, the pattern becomes obvious. Confusing traps emphasize novelty, exclusivity, perfection, and immediacy. Smart purchases emphasizes consensus, substitution, history, and flexibility. One group keeps you chasing, the other gives you options. So this contrast shows up everywhere in the hobby. Buying spots in breaks instead of the exact card you want replaces control with chance. Chasing population 1 grades replaces ownership with competition. Buying during playoff runs replaces patience with urgency. Mystery products replaces transparency with anticipation. In every case, confusion increases engagement while clarity reduces impulse. There is one final question that cuts through all of it, and it is deceptively simple. If this card never went up in price, would you still feel satisfied with what you paid? So answering that honestly forces you to confront your motivation. If the answer is yes, you made a hobby purchase and received what you wanted. There is no loss there. If the answer is no, you were relying on appreciation to justify the decision. That is not collecting, that is a speculation. Speculation is not inherently wrong, but speculation without awareness is where the industry makes its easiest money. The moment you recognize which zone you are in, joy or hope, you stop being confused. And when confusion ends, the relationship between you and the hobby becomes something far more sustainable, intentional, and difficult to exploit. So, to see how confusion operates outside of theory, outside of philosophy, psychology, or abstract market mechanics, you have to look at what actually happens to prices when belief collides with reality. The easiest place to observe this is not in obscure corners of the hobby, but right at its center, where attention is loudest and money moves fastest. Late 2025 provides a perfect snapshot because it shows hype, it shows correction and clarity happening at the same time. What makes these examples powerful is not hindsight, it's how predictable the outcomes were if you understood the role confusion plays from the beginning. Let's start with baseball because baseball cards expose hype cycles more brutally than almost any other sports. So early 2025 belonged to Roki Sasaki. He was framed as inevitable, a generational arm, a global star in waiting. The language around him wasn't cautious or conditional, it was declarative. People didn't say he might be great. They spoke as if greatness had already occurred and the market was merely catching up. As a result, basic raw rookie cards, nothing rare, nothing graded, nothing historically significant, were trading in the $60 to $75 range. That price made no sense if you stop to think about what actually being purchased, a mass-produced piece of cardboard tied to future performance that had not yet materialized. But thinking is exactly what hype discourages. When everyone knows something, questioning it feels unnecessary, even foolish. Then reality that did what reality always does, a slower than expected start. Minor injury scares, nothing catastrophic, nothing career ending, just enough friction to interrupt the narrative. And once the narrative broke, confusion dissolved almost instantly. The same card that once felt urgent became ordinary. Prices collapsed to around $2, not because the card changed, but because belief did. The drop wasn't an anomaly, it was the system functioning as designed. Early buyers weren't paying for the card, they were paying for the story attached to it. Once the story lost momentum, the price reverted to what the object itself could actually support. The lesson here is uncomfortable but essential. Buying at peak anticipation means you are subsidizing everyone who sells into you. Waiting until the first moment of doubt is often the first time a price reflects reality instead of what? Fantasy. So, basketball shows the same pattern, but with a different texture because basketball hype is amplified by product design. Cooper Flag sits at the center of that storm with the return of Topps Chrome Basketball. His cards have become the focal point of an entire release cycle. Breaks are filled instantly, spots sell for hundreds of dollars. Every stream is a countdown to the next big pull. What makes this a confusion trap is not Cooper Flag's talent. He may very well justify long-term attention. The trap lies in how his supply is being distributed. Instead of one or two culturally dominant rookie cards, the market is being flooded with variations, different colors, patterns, serials, refractors, sparkles, superfractors. Each is marketed as special. Each is framed as scarce. Each is shouted about as if it might be the one that defines his career. But history is very clear on what survives this cycle. Over time, the market collapses toward consensus. Collectors and buyers gravitate toward one or two versions that become culturally correct. Everything else slowly fades into the background, not because it is ugly or meaningless, but because attention is finite. 5 years from now, the vast majority of today's loudest parallels will feel oddly irrelevant. The card didn't fail, the fragmentation did. Buying into this moment means buying while the market is intoxicated by novelty. Prices reflect excitement, not durability. Waiting 6 months, sometimes even less, often results in dramatically lower prices for the same underlying card, minus the noise. The confusion trap here is believing that immediacy equals opportunity. In reality, immediacy usually means you are paying the highest possible premium for uncertainty. Now, contrast both of those examples with what's happening at the other end of the spectrum. While rookies are whipsawing, cards tied to established greatness are doing something very boring and very telling. They are holding value or quietly setting record. A Michael Jordan and LeBron James dual autograph selling for 8 figures isn't about hype, it's about agreement. This is no debate about their place in history. No upcoming season can undo what they've already done. Shohei Otani fits into this category in real time. His prices are very high, but they are anchored to achievement, not anticipation. His dominance is documented. His uniqueness is settled. When people buy Otani cards, they are not betting on what might happen. They are acknowledging what already has. That distinction matters more than almost any metric you can look up. This is why cards tied to legends behave differently. They are not immune to market cycles, but they are not dependent on hope. Their demand does not vanish with a bad week or a slow month. Buying a hyped rookie is like buying a blueprint and imagining the house. Buying a legend is like buying the house after it's been lived in, inspected, and admired for decades. Once you see these patterns, applying them to your own decisions becomes straightforward, but only if you are willing to ignore the noise. Every smart purchase starts with verification instead of excitement. Population reports matter not because they are perfect, but because they are exposed exaggeration. A card marketed as rare loses credibility when thousands of identical copies exist. Sales history matters not because it predicts the future, but because it proves liquidity in the present. Asking prices are fantasies. Completed sales are facts. Now, the most powerful filter, though, is time. Asking whether people will still care in 2 years sounds simple, but it cuts through almost every confusion trap in the hobby. Most rookies fail that test not because they are bad, but because attention moves on. Hall of Famers pass it effortlessly because their relevance is no longer conditional. What all of this leads to is a shift in posture. Instead of reacting to what feels exciting, you begin observing what endures. Instead of chasing moments, you start measuring behavior. Confusion thrives on urgency, clarity thrives on patience. The industry will always present the next can't miss opportunity. That is its job. Now, your job, if you want to protect both your enjoyment and your money, is to recognize what you are being invited to buy an object and when you are being invited to buy a feeling. Once you can tell the difference, the market stops feeling like a maze and starts looking like what it really is: a system that rewards those who wait for clarity and quietly taxes those who don't. So if this video made you uncomfortable, that's actually a good sign. It means something clicked. Because once you understand that confusion is profitable, you also stop blaming yourself for outcomes that were never designed to be fair. You stop chasing clarity through spending. You stop mistaking participation for progress. And that's really what this channel is all about. Not telling you to quit the hobby, not telling you to hate it, but helping you to see it clearly so you can decide when you're paying for fun, when you're speculating, and when you're just feeding the machine. So if you want more videos like this, breaking down hype cycles, market myths, and the structures that quietly drain people's wallets, subscribe. Not because it helps the algorithm, but because clarity compounds. And if you got a question, a take you disagree with, or a story where this finally makes sense in hindsight, drop it in the comments. I actually read them. So this is Ryan. Thanks for watching.